Well, today, Donald Trump will be in Youngstown, Ohio to give a speech on terrorism and foreign policy. According to the campaign, Trump is set to call for restrictions on immigration and places with a history, from places with a history of terrorism. Meanwhile, a New York Times article is raising questions about Trump's campaign chairman's ties to foreign funds. The Times reports on secret handwritten ledgers that showed $12.7 million in undisclosed cash payments were earmarked for Paul Manafort by the political party of the pro-Russian former Ukrainian president. Investigators believe the payments were part of an illegal off-the-books system whose recipients also included election officials. Manafort has since dismissed these allegations, calling them unfounded, silly, and nonsensical. Chief White House correspondent Major Garrett has more.
According to the New York Times, $12.7 million was earmarked for Paul Manafort by the pro-Russian political party of his main client, former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych, from 2007 to 2012. That's according to a so-called black ledger analyzed by Ukrainian anti-corruption investigators who believe it documents, quote, an illegal off-the-books system whose recipients also included election officials. This morning, Manafort issued a statement denying it. I have never received a single off-the-books cash payment as falsely reported by the New York Times, nor have I ever done work for the governments of Ukraine or Russia. The suggestion that I accepted cash payments is unfounded, silly, and nonsensical. As Trump prepares to deliver a major speech on terrorism in Ohio today, the Clinton campaign called the news troubling, adding Trump has a responsibility to disclose Manafort's and all other campaign employees' ties to Russian or pro-Kremlin entities.
I'm running against the crooked media. That's what I'm running against. Sure.
The report provides more ammunition for Trump's ongoing clash with the New York Times.
We have a newspaper that's failing badly. Real garbage. They're garbage. It's a garbage paper. Maybe we'll start thinking about taking their press credentials away from them. You know?
Beyond the media bashing, Trump is setting up another excuse for losing: voter fraud.
The only way we can lose, in my opinion, I really mean this, Pennsylvania, is if cheating goes on. I really believe it.
Trump called for volunteer election monitors.
Go around and look and watch other polling places and make sure that it's 100% fine.
Chief White House correspondent Major Garrett is in the CBS News Washington Bureau. Thanks a lot for joining us, Major.
Sure.
So it seems like Donald Trump has almost sort of ratcheted up his war against the media. It's been ongoing, but I feel like over the past few days, he's really sort of spiked, calling members of the media dishonest and corrupt. And I'm wondering how much of this is a deliberate strategy. I was speaking to Rick Davis last week, and he said, look, Hillary Clinton's unfavorables are so high right now, calling her, corrupt Hillary really doesn't make much of a difference. So perhaps strategically he's shifting his focus and targeting the media?
Well, Trump is trying to delegitimize the American media in hopes that in that process he can shield himself from stories about his own campaign, which are unfavorable because the trajectory of Donald Trump's current campaign is also unfavorable. He's not gaining ground. He's losing ground, not only nationally, but in every single important swing state. And all of the fundamentals that Trump has always lacked in this campaign, he still lacks. A steady message, ground game, fundraising, all of those essentials. And that coverage is skeptical and in some cases harsh. Trump doesn't like that. And he knows his supporters very much are skeptical and in some cases more hostile to the media than Trump is. And you're absolutely right. In the last couple of weeks at the rallies, of which I've attended many, the ferocity of Trump's anti-media campaign has certainly intensified. And the crowds have become, I'm not going to say menacing, but they're certainly more hostile than they were a month or two ago. And what this does is it creates an atmosphere where everyone within that room is on the same side and they feel besieged by the media, feel besieged by all these outside forces. It is somewhat consistent with Trump's overall message that there's a certain part of America that's not represented in Washington, that can't get anything done for itself. And this criticism of the media feeds into that. But it becomes a kind of circular conversation. It doesn't enlarge the base of Trump's support. That's reflected in the polls. And it doesn't do anything at all to captivate or capture the attention, let alone the support of millennials, which now surveys are beginning to show saw the convention in Cleveland, were turned off by it, are turned off by so many things about Trump's message. And one of the great questions for Hillary Clinton in this campaign, could she capture a good portion of the enthusiasm that Bernie Sanders generated among millennials? There is increasing evidence that she can. And part of the reason is because Trump is such a turnoff to that particular section of the American electorate.
Major, I want to turn to something that was in your report. As you pointed out, the New York Times reported Trump's campaign manager, Paul Manafort, possibly received over $12 million from people connected to the pro-Russian former president of Ukraine. Now, Manafort responded dismissing the New York Times report, saying, I have never received a single off-the-books cash payment as falsely reported by the New York Times, nor have I ever done work for the governments of Ukraine and Russia. And he called all of this unfounded, silly, and nonsensical. What do you make of that?
So the New York Times report, if you read it all the way through, discloses that the investigators in Ukraine who are trying to unravel the various nests of payments and other possibly shady deals carried out when Viktor Yanukovych was the pro-Russian president of Ukraine. And they stipulate that there is a ledger that they've come across that has 22 entries with Paul Manafort's name in it. These investigators, these anti-corruption investigators, believe this ledger is a sort of roadmap to off-the-books payments to lots of people, elected officials and otherwise. And Manafort's name is in there 22 times. And if you look at the amounts next to those entries, it adds up to $12.7 million. But here's the important but in all this. The investigators cannot assert and cannot claim that they have any proof that Manafort received any of that money, even a dollar of the $12.7 million on these ledgers. And that's Manafort's point. There is a supposition being drawn here. There is a lot of circumstantial evidence, but no proof. And that's where Manafort is claiming he has a ironclad denial of this, because the investigators can't find the money, can't prove it ever made it to Manafort. What they have, though, is a ledger that they believe is a roadmap to all sorts of payments. So this story has much farther to go. The one thing that we have always known about Manafort is that when he was a lobbyist and a consultant in Washington, he liked to work for dictators. He started that work in the Philippines under Ferdinand Marcos, and then did a lot of it in Ukraine for Yanukovych and his government. So one thing we know about Manafort, he was more than willing to be paid handsomely to represent very unsavory characters on the international stage. Some people in Washington are drawn to that kind of work, others are not. Manafort clearly was.
So looking forward to today, Donald Trump is preparing to give a major policy speech in Youngstown, Ohio. He's going to be focusing on immigration and fighting terrorism. So what do we know about this speech? What can we expect?
That it will say that the rise of ISIS occurred under President Obama and possibly Hillary Clinton's watch when she was Secretary of State, and that they did not take this threat nearly seriously enough. It'll be interesting to see if Trump tries to go back to that widely discredited assertion that the president and the Secretary of State, former Secretary of State, should be viewed as the co-founders of ISIS. Probably not. But he'll make the case that in Egypt, Libya, Syria, and Iraq, there was an inattention to the rise of ISIS and an ineffective assembling of a coalition and an ineffective military strategy to deal with ISIS. And one of the things that Trump will point to is some of the things that were revealed last week, that there were rosy assessments of the fight against ISIS that did not any way, shape, or form live up to the actual facts on the ground. That was something that came out of the Pentagon. That was something congressional investigators have since revealed. And basically be very critical of this administration's awareness of ISIS, taking that threat seriously, and then dealing with it from a military and strategic point of view seriously. And then Trump will also talk about immigration, regionalizing all bans on immigration and very serious vetting of any people who come from these particular areas, hotbeds of terrorism, Trump will say. So when you think about the Muslim ban on immigration, it sounds as if Trump is trying to expand that. We may get a little bit more detail about that in the speech, but clearly it will be an unstinting criticism of where we are now and how we got there, laying it all at the feet of President Obama and former Secretary of State Clinton.
All right, Major Garrett in Washington. Thank you, Major.
You got it.